I'm Erik Ghenoiu, faculty member in History and Theory at SCI-Arc and the coordinator of research for the Institute.
Hello, I'm Patrice Derrington. I'm the Holliday Professor of Real Estate and the Director of the Real Estate Development Program at Columbia University.
So let's maybe get down to business today with the discussion about real estate and housing and how the kind of histories of these fields have led us to the unusual circumstances that are so challenging today. We take for granted as normal, but we can see as we kind of look over the history of these things that we made these decisions not so long ago, and for reasons that may be expired, but that we're left with a structure that we built to do something else than maybe what we needed to do today.
Well, that's absolutely true. You know, it's a glaring inequality, and it's just so manifested and so much predominant in the way everyone perceives their everyday life and feels their everyday life. The interesting thing is that it's really centuries old. I really looked back to see, when did real estate development start as this sort of money-grabbing business? Do you know, it moved from being a cottage industry, that is, adding, a place out the back or a wing and putting in some lodges, to being a business with Covent Garden in the 17th century in London. We often think that development's a new and 20th century and modern day capitalism thing, but it really did begin, though, with the birth of capitalism in London in that 17th century, as they really relished all the prosperity that had occurred with the Elizabethan trade and so on. The interesting thing that I found was that when these developers set about doing a scheme such as Covent Garden, where there was housing, a lot of housing, they actually were very concerned with the community and equality and having a mix of socioeconomic groups within the neighborhood. So St. Paul's Church there, a very, very important piece of Inigo Jones, the first English architect, was paid for and constructed and so on by this first developer. The interesting thing is that when it started, there was some social conscience. The understanding was that housing was part of a broader urban community and that was to be taken into account when you did it. What happened, unfortunately, was that with the notion of real estate not just being about being used, about having a functional use, that is shelter, even sort of social presentation and so on. Once it actually became an investment asset, that was the turning point. And, unfortunately, quickly after it started making its appearance in 17th century London, there was a huge flurry of investing. All of these joint stock companies were on offer. And once you start seeing real estate as having an additional role as an investment asset, it plays to a whole nother audience as well at the same time. And it became financialized and now is really so much at the mercy of global capital markets. And that's the financialization. And a lot of that is what presses it into being so dismissive of social need and community need and urban equality.
And how does it relate then to the developments that were happening already in the kind of early colonies of England that led to things like the more dispersed kind of suburban development models that we also inherited?
In England, you had London, which was this tremendously independent, democratic city. It was the center of all this commerce and trade. And so the king, the monarch, really had to beg the city often for funding. And in fact, the population doubled within a century. The monarch didn't have the money to build the necessary housing. The city, which was contained within its walls, didn't either. And so it really was a private developer. At that point, not only was England bringing in all of these goods from all over the world, but they were also sending their people to all of these places. And so this model of private development was greatly encouraged in all of these settlements.
Of course, we think in terms of American history over here, and we hadn't received that model of development in a really substantial way until well into the 18th century. It comes so much later, but maybe the use of the colonies as a kind of experimentation point to work out other models of how to build the future up.
I think the problem is that we got stuck in it. We have got to really rethink our relationship of the built environment with the capital markets. I think we've just got to start saying, capital is here. Are people a little bit more integrated with their potential involvement with capital? I think it's good to put our notion of shelter and our decisions about our real estate, whether we use it or invest in it and so on, put it in with these other decisions about how we actually value items according to our more existential use of them or a more existential perspective of them. And so we try and have our students work with the notion of user. What's the user's concept here of economic value with respect to the space they're actually inhabiting? It's disruption time. And things like Airbnb, WeWork, and so on have showed that technology can put the consumer or the user with this control in their hands, more so than they could have done previously.
If what we're looking at is the possibility of disrupting a kind of surprisingly deeply ingrained capital model from the colonial period, that there's this kind of technological version of it. And so there's this kind of policy angle of changing the playing board. There's something about altering how the money can come in or cannot come in. Is it just a question of pursuing all of these models as they kind of emerge, or do you see something as right now maybe the most promising route in the rethinking of how we structure these relationships?
We are a community, and we come together to have governance, to do these things, to take these overarching steps and decisions and structures and have those for us, because we do need to do that. And should we not, instead of developing with given solutions, should we not be developing different sort of contexts for people to be able to take more control in making these economic decisions? And so I think that we should be thinking a little bit more about the user, the resident, the person on the street, and how they are interacting, particularly with this technology that is in one way empowering them and make more pertinent decisions. It's also at the same time capturing them and, maybe misleading or misorienting and so on. I think we should interrogate at the level of how property and real estate and decisions are made. What is the technology doing? And then how are we, who are architects, creators of the built environment, what's our role in there? Are we contributing to this in a constructive way? And of course, taking into account this financial aspect.
Something that springs to mind in light of this kind of constellation of considerations is something that's much discussed in Los Angeles and in other places right now, the ADU ordinance and this idea of the accessory dwelling unit, so that it's this kind of thing that combines policy, solution, kind of grassroots that appeal to individuals. And so I think there's like the possibility of that, the technology, the grassroots, and the policy to kind of interact in ways that produce a recognizable object that we can see and that people can understand is something in their experience. Is this maybe something that we should be looking at as a way forward, something that ultimately coalesces into something recognizable? Or is it more likely to be changes that are vast, but maybe harder to see on the surface?
That ADU model is fascinating. And, we have, I think that has been a light bulb going up, turned on. And, it ties in very well with what was happening in terms of crowdfunding and the ability for the people to really closely link their needs for space, their decisions about space, and their financing. So I think we could look at that in terms of our built environment framework a little more closely. When we think about the built environment, we certainly do know that how we've been dealing with it and creating it and managing it to date is now done. Is the solution always have to be a permanent thing? Does it have to be there and that's it? And the solution and the architect's done it, we build it, we walk away. No, I think we're starting to realize that these things, what we should be creating is a framework by which change is actually managed and encouraged and facilitated, rather than this, do we knock it down and rebuild or not? But it's a different way of thinking about what we create as space, as shelters, but also how they're financed, because we are up against, as I say, this notion that real estate is an investment asset. We make the assumption that that building lasts forever. Forever. The maths behind that is about a cash flow stream forever. And, you know, this is sort of absurd, absolutely absurd. But we built that in, we sort of grabbed that from corporate finance and threw it into the mix of how we think about real estate. And consequently, we're left with buildings that everyone is valuing forever, and yet we really should be, you know, changing them every 5 years. I think the way we're moving, the way in which what we need is going to be changing, and we don't know how. But we do know that there are folks who like to change their mind frequently, and that's refreshing.
For certainly, the banks tend to do this permanent model. There's this kind of investor, like a real estate investment trust that is institutional and actually is planning a very definitely to make its full profit in a very specific amount of time. And then there's maybe a middle ground of this private equity that wants to show itself and advertise its own power. And so the architects all want that third category, because that's the one that will let them do monumental, crazy looking buildings. It seems like such a right moment to add a fourth player into that system through the kind of the technology that's available to do it. That, like, for sure, collectives of actual humans could come up with better solutions than the ones that we're seeing deployed on this systemic level.
Yes, it like everything, it has to get back to a more democratic tussle for the solution than to be trying to push existing entities, existing constructs to do this or do that. So, you know, we're all participating in it in some way. So that's probably not going to be where the change occurs. I think the change is going to occur when we understand these everyday decisions we make and how much power we actually have to be more prescriptive of the features we want and be able to value them economically. We're acting as economic persons or creatures. We just don't all have the skills yet to know how to make that translation between what we want and what we're prepared to pay.
I think that there's certainly that category of developer who does want to make a contribution and imagines themselves like building the world and do a better place. And I think that it probably would surprise people to know that there's a significant proportion of them who feel that way and kind of would like to do those projects. And I think that there's a lot of hope, because we all could get behind it. Even the corporation that wanted to get rid of its old campus could get behind something that it knew would be a better way to leave the city behind it.
You're absolutely right. And our program, I have about 150 students a year now. Probably about 30% of them are already architects who are wanting to, bypass that developer process and do it themselves. So we really have this great opportunity even within the study. And so it's very exciting.
Well, thank you so much, Patrice, for joining us today. It's been really illuminating to think about this history and where it's left us.
Thank you very much for having me. Absolutely enjoyed being with you.